The Will Run Bomb. Well, here we go. The Will Run Bomber plant essentially was an incredible manufacturing facility that produced 8,685 B-24 bombers for World War II. It also embodied changes in American culture, where we saw women introduced in the industrial workplace. The popular Rosie the Riveter image comes from a factory worker named Rose Will Monroe that worked at the Will Run Bomber plant. When the opportunity presented itself for us to save 144,000 square feet of the bomber plant, we knew it would be the perfect home for the new museum. The Yankee Air Museum is a regional aviation museum that was founded back in 1981. We're very different than most museums in that you can get right up to the airplanes and then even fly in some of the airplanes. Originally, the museum was in a World War II hangar until early October fire in 2004 destroyed the entire museum. We were left virtually homeless. In 2010, the Yankee Air Museum acquired this former technology school. We knew it was a temporary home. We knew we needed a bigger space, and when an opportunity presented itself to secure a future home, we jumped on it.
It just really struck a chord with a lot of people, this very emotional attachment to the Will Run Bomber plant. And this was a piece of history we're going to live in.
It is an absolute, very rare occasion when you get to put history inside of history. There's 3 aircraft that we're moving today. One is the RB-57 Canberra, which is a reconnaissance airplane. Another one is a Caribou, military transport aircraft from the Vietnam era. And then one of the most precious pieces that we have is a World War II privateer 4-engine Navy patrol aircraft that we are desperately seeking to get indoors.
This is the first time an aircraft has been in this building since 1950. And it's going to save these aircraft from any further deterioration.
To take this blank canvas and turn it into a national level museum is going to need an incredible amount of support and an incredible amount of funding. Saving 144,000 square feet of this facility, it does become our largest artifact. And we're proud to place a museum within this incredible piece of American history. So there's a great story behind that. If you noticed right about halfway through when the truck was coming down the taxiway all by itself, it said professional driver, closed course, do not attempt to tow historic warplanes. Well, there's 2 things behind that. First off, when the GM lawyers first saw the video, they said you can't ever air this video because someone's going to take it and try and tow an airplane and burn up a transmission. They're going to sue us. So they got around that by their little
I want to thank
stand
you all for coming tonight. I think this is going to be a neat program.
Yep, there we go. Sorry about that.
Put them someplace so they'd be accessible to people to see them when we're not operating. And so they opened in the back of the last building. The 3 major parts are the Aviation Museum, the building we're in with the Spruce Goose. The Space Museum is to the east, and it consists of space artifacts. It's kind of the story of manned space flight. It has a Titan II that sticks up in the front of the building all the way straight up 109 feet tall. And it's kind of themed to go along with the rest of the museum campus.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
So we put the water park in principally to draw families in here to add to the educational experience and also expose people to the idea of aviation in space and maybe tweak the kids a little bit, inspire and educate the mission of the museum.
So the 747 on the roof, story goes that the brain trust that was trying to figure out how can we make this unique. And someone threw out the idea of, well, let's put a plane on top. All the slides start in the plane, travel outside the plane above the roof line, and they eventually make their way through the roof back into the park. School of Science Center, staff with educators throughout the day. We try to do educational stuff, at least once every quarter, big events, bringing people out in addition to all the private and smaller groups and classes that we offer throughout the year.
I would say that 90% of our volunteers are veterans. We share our experiences, our life experiences with our clients, with the school children that come in. We do work with education hand in hand on a daily basis.
Well, the aviation, particularly the artifacts in this museum, represent a significant portion of our country's history. We get a lot of young kids that really don't know anything about the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and these aircraft can bring a piece of that to them, and it makes it far more interesting than just standing there lecturing to them. The museum's basic mission is education. They have a complete educational staff that is a full-time part of the museum. They have outreach programs for underprivileged kids. They have programs that they actually educate over in the Space Museum. There's a science academy, and it's just heart and soul of the museum, education. It's what we do as well.
The advantage of having a museum and its artifacts and its stories, I can bring the true history to the classroom. So when I teach rocket science, for example, I bring them here not just to show how rockets work, but also to talk about the historical evolution of rocketry. The mission of Evergreen Space Museum is to tell the story, to chronicle the journey of man's efforts to move himself from the surface of the Earth. And that's an ongoing story. So the museum is a live museum, and that it starts with the Wright brothers in 1903 and goes on to the first and largest wooden aircraft ever flown with this Bruce Goose, to what we do now in partnership with the high school students. But we also are looking into the future, because what these students are doing now is the history that this museum is in a great position to chronicle. And I think that's the beauty of it, is we are now creating history at this museum, and we will continue to document it in the future.
Okay, we stop there, but
experienced some of those PDs and then brought it into his classroom afterward. My name is Nick Lawrence. I teach at East Bronx Academy for the Future in the Bronx, New York. I've participated in a summer residency at IWM Duxford at the American Air Museum. I also have worked collaboratively with the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum for the past 4 years. My first experience with flight museums in general was when I went to the American Air Museum in England for summer residency, for their first cohort of their summer residency program. The focus there was on teacher PD. It was on bringing in teachers to collaborate in a meaningful way. They treated all of the teachers like professionals, like colleagues, which was super fantastic. And it also gave us opportunities for collaboration after the PD itself, after the residency. One of the biggest elements of that was using the Roger Freeman photo collection with students to do actual research in the field. The big takeaways I had from that: museums themselves are for exploration. I've been to a number of museums in New York and otherwise with students, and I sort of fell into the same kind of trap that many teachers do, that if you bring kids to a museum, you have them check off some boxes, you say, oh, okay, they saw these things, that's great. But one of the biggest moments I had at this museum as part of this PD was to really understand the way that teachers should have their students approach their time at the museum. And again, the big thing that I walked away with from that experience, one of the big things, was that teachers should be collaborating with museum staff to ensure that their students are getting the richest learning experience as possible. The second big sort of ongoing experience I've had with flight museums is with the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in Manhattan. For the past 4 years, I've brought my students from the Bronx down to the Intrepid twice a year in the spring as part of our World War II and Cold War units. The Intrepid is a museum that's very unique and is full of fantastic artifacts and resources, including a connection to veterans networks that allow them to bring in veterans for students to speak with. I took my learning experiences from the American Air Museum and really tried to apply them in this setting. We set up projects around exploring museum resources and trying to add to that collection through a project in which students recreated the ship's newsletter. And then we tried to make sure that the same sort of approach was used that I had when I was at the American Air Museum in England. So the multi-visit aspect of that work is pretty unique as well, in that we taught students that, again, running through a museum and seeing everything is not the purpose of going to a museum when you're thinking like a historian. You're going to do research to bring questions up, to explore those questions, whether you find the answers or not. And the work I've done with the Intrepid has been like ongoing PD with them. They've met me where I am as a teacher, where my students are, and we've built experiences for the students to leverage the many rich resources the Intrepid has to maximize learning outcomes. Some of the big takeaways that I've had, both with EAM, but also especially with the Intrepid, visiting museums not just an extra, it's not an enrichment activity. It's part of the curriculum, it should be. So it's important for the teachers to understand and to have the development to better leverage those resources to impact student learning. So, some examples of how my work with the Intrepid has aligned with my curriculum. Here's a map that shows lesson sequence, some notes, the alignment to our middle school writing curriculum, which is through Teachers College of Columbia, alignment with the National C3 framework, which works really well, honestly, with museum visits, which is could be a key point in teacher PD, especially with teachers in the United States, and then alignment with the Common Core Learning Standards. If I were going to create a call to action for museum educators, I'd include a couple of things in it. I would say that they should work collaboratively with teachers to align the mission of the museum with the mission of the teacher's school and their individual classroom. Treat teachers like colleagues and professionals. The last thing is, teachers should be guided through the same experiences that museums hope children will have, right? To teach them things like exploring a museum is the most important part of the experience there. Going through the C3 inquiry arc, for instance, is a wonderful opportunity for students to generate questions, to practice answering those questions and researching those questions, and then finding ways for them to take action based on their findings. Those are my 2 cents. I hope that everyone's enjoying the conference. Thanks very much.
So this is an area where visitors sit on a cushioned bench and sort of watch the world go by, and it's supposed to be the kind of restorative, contemplative space that we like to give the visitors and a little bit of a break as they have walked through the most of the exhibition by that point. So, that's it.
I want to show you, in terms of exterior documentation, this is a nice little trick. This is basically a tree trimming pole with a camera mounted to the top. So this is a really quick method of documenting the whole object without a lot of gear.
Give me the willies, Adam.
Sorry. Everything worked out okay. Yes, it was very slow and careful work. These are the images that came out of it. So if you're new to photogrammetry, one thing to look for is almost a time-lapse-like effect if you're scrolling through the images really quickly. All right. And I'll find my presentation eventually. So talking a little bit about the command module. So this is a photogrammetry data. This is the initial CAD model. And then last, let's see if it's still up. This is the CAD model with full resolution maps on top. And with that, I think I should probably call it quits. There are some more things that I could go over, or what do you think time-wise? So again, we're doing a dual sensor capture here. It's photogrammetry plus laser arm scanning. So you get the great geometry from the laser scanner and fantastic color from the photogrammetry. And something that we did that was interesting here for the first time is we made sure that the pedestal for both types of capture were in the same place so we can minimize the movement of the object. So when we're digitizing static objects like the Spirit of St. Louis or the command module, it's enough of a headache to try to integrate all those different data sets from different sensors. When you involve moving fabric into the equation, things get exponentially more difficult. So here it's a matter of trying to make sure to absolutely minimize any movement in the fabric, and otherwise know that you have to cat model your way out of some of these issues. There's another example of the camera positions. A typical object like this could have 200 to 400 individual photographs taken on a turntable. This is the point cloud that Megan was talking about. And you can see it's imperfect on the fingertips there. That's probably where there was less texture and detail on the surface because it's a smooth rubber. And you can see that's manifested in the polygon model as well. And then this is the laser scan data, which looks much cleaner. And there's still, you can see some occlusions there where the scanner couldn't reach underneath. And of course, in the interior, there are going to be things that simply can't be scanned by line of sight. So we're going to be integrating CT scans as well into the documentation of these objects. And then one great thing about the way technology has been progressing, a year ago, if we tried to scan the shield on the helmet, we would have gotten probably absolutely no data whatsoever, and the latest version of the laser arm scanner actually did a really good job. You can see it's noisy, you can see it's not complete, but you have more than enough data to actually create a continuous surface via CAD modeling. And then we have Space Shuttle Discovery. So this is where we get to see if we learned anything after scanning the Apollo command modules. The Apollo command module is tight quarters, but the real trick is how do you represent enough resolution to across such a large object to resemble render all the hard edge surfaces and the buttons and switches and knobs. And now we need to take what we learned in Apollo and apply it over a much larger object. So the goal here for me, not necessarily, I'm a blossoming space buff, having worked on all these projects, but I'll admit in a room where I probably shouldn't, that before I worked on this project, my vision of the space shuttle was based on the black and white plastic toy that I had as a kid. And if you get in front of this thing, it is incredible. It's beat up. It's got all these textures all over that you just couldn't imagine. This sort of there's almost a quilted fabric on the white surfaces and uniquely labeled tiles. And so my job here is to completely erase that plastic space shuttle from my mind and do that for others who may be in a similar boat. I know none of you here are quite like that, but we're out there. I apologize. So this is some initial results from photogrammetric data. And again, you get that incredible resolution. And since then, the resolution on our cameras has doubled from this. So we'll be able to get essentially double the resolution from these test images. And one of the cool things that we'll be able to do here is have a orthogonal stitched gigapixel image of every single side of the space shuttle. So we've been asked sort of as preliminary hypothetical questions about what to do with enormous spaces using this data set. You can do simple things like actually print on the material that can be laid on the floor that people can walk on.
and actually lay that in a, a gymnasium or something like that, and actually give people a sense of scale of this object. That's a really critical thing that you can do here is convey scale in a way that typical photography can sometimes have trouble doing. Having been inside the space shuttle for 2 separate days to test different scanning equipment, there's this crazy contrast where the exterior is so much bigger than you might have realized, and the interior is so much smaller. And so we can actually convey that once we finish that data set.